Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Thomas Olivieri, who is a dark fantasy author. And Thomas, for readers unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe what you write?
Well, first of all, Selena, thanks for having me here. Uh, Definitely, it is dark fantasy. Although I would also say, from a reader's perspective, it might be urban fantasy, not the kind of urban fantasy where a dragon's elected president and vampires run hedge funds. But my stories, for the most part, are about everyday people, people from our world who are experiencing the fantastic in some way. Yeah, there are a few stories that are set in the past, but it's mainly a contemporary book. It's mainly a book um, about us.
About us. Okay. And what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
These are the books that I've always been drawn to. You know, I do love Tolkien, and I love Roald Dahl, and all of these stories where people just kind of set out on something and they don't know where they're going. Um, Definitely, these are there are some stories out there where the characters definitely know what genre they're in. And they definitely know, oh, you know, I'm in a barbarian story, and if I act this way, this will happen. And I'm not that interested in those kinds of stories. I'm much more interested in stories where people have to figure it out and they have to figure out what's going on around them. I'm not sure they always do. Or, I did read the book, of course, but um, I'm not sure that they ever quite get that total certainty. But I think that's where the fun is, and I think that is why I've been attracted to stories, and why I like to read the kinds of things I like to read. Um, People solving problems and people ending up in situations that they did not know were possible.
Okay. So tell me about your latest book. I know you've written several, but tell me about your latest book. And what were the steps that you took to bring it from your initial inspiration to your finished book?
It's a book of short stories. So as I was writing the book, um, or as I was writing these individual stories that I did not imagine would ever go together, I started to see that there were, themes developing, and that even though the stories aren't connected by character or plot, um, they were connected by other things. And I started to imagine them coming together. And I approached my publisher. I said, I have this idea for a book of stories. It's all Halloween stories. And then I had to explain to him that none of them are actually, taking place on Halloween. It's just that vibe and that world. And I imagined readers who were maybe adults, and the kids go off on Halloween and you read the book. So it kind of came together by happenstance. And once it was done, by final revision, I knew it was a complete book. And um, certainly the versions of the stories that were in little magazines or whatever are a bit different. They're better suited to the book than they were when they were just living on their own out in the wild.
And the name of your book?
It's called Swords, Snakes, and Shipwrecks. I feel like I should have a copy here to show everyone, but I don't. Um,
Okay,
and it is a book that has swords in it and snakes in it and shipwrecks. So you will not be disappointed.
great. Okay. So what kind of research did you have to do, or if any, um, for this book?
That is a little bit of an embarrassing question. I
Okay.
was teaching people how to do research when I wrote most of this book. And one of the stories is a story called Theater Gossip. It's one of my favorites. I set in the wrong era. I set it about 50 years before it could have possibly happened. So I do apologize for that in the introduction. I don't know how many people read introductions, but if you do read it, you'll get a little apology from me. I didn't want to go back and change it. The story was, I won't say it's perfect, but it's as good as I'm ever going to get it. And I'm not going to change anything to make it, more verastic and at the same time kind of decrease the quality. So, and as far as the other stories go, I didn't have to do that much research. I'm not a, I'm not a crime writer. I'm not a historian. So, and like I said before, most of the stories take place in the present. So I don't have
Okay.
to research and say, in what year did people start wearing sneakers? It's not an issue that came up.
Okay. So are most of your stories that you write short stories rather than novel length?
I have never written a novel.
Ah,
Um, I do love novels and I love to read novels, but um, I haven't written one yet.
okay. You think you might write one in the future?
Well, I won't be doing it today.
Not in one day, no.
No,
Okay.
um, I may. Um, Probably my next book will be another book of short stories, and then after that, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see if people are looking for a novel.
Okay. All right. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out uh the swords, snakes, and shipwrecks?
I think the biggest challenge was there were a few stories in there that I would send out to publishers. And I would get these notes saying, "Oh, we love this story, but it's not the kind of thing that we publish." Um, there's
There's
a
the but.
story in there called Hebert and the Brothers of Blackbridge. And I wrote the first version of it a long time ago. And I sent it out to, I think, every magazine that would possibly be interested in it. And it was coming in and out for years and years. And finally, I was just like, you know what? Everyone likes the story, but no one's going to publish it. I'll just put it in the book. Uh,
Okay.
and it's hard to gauge what people will be interested in, And um, I know that the number one advice people give for writers is don't get discouraged, but the third or fourth time something comes back, it's hard to not be discouraged.
Oh, some of the other authors have been saying they've had like 17, 20, even more rejections for the same story. And sometimes they rewrite it. Sometimes they um sometimes they just send it out again and finally it gets published by another publishing company.
Right. And you
But
don't know what people are looking for. What you're writing,
exactly.
you may send them a story that's, 4,700 words long, and they want 5,000 just to fill out that last page.
Mhm.
And most rejection letters look the same. Um, Although,
Yeah.
with that story in particular, I got a lot of, "Oh, we love the story. It's just not what we're looking for."
Hmm. Right. Right.
But that is the hard part is, sending things out that, you are emotionally attached to, like, oh, I did great work here. And then, months go by and then the
And then the
rejection comes.
rejection. Then the rejection
Writing
letter
isn't
comes.
that hard. It's just you gotta steel yourself up for, um, whatever response you get.
Hmm. So what else can we expect from you in the near future?
I have a second book of stories that it doesn't have a name yet. It is mostly done. I am doing a draft of it right now, and I hope that will be out later in this year or maybe early next year. It will be another book of urban fantasy, dark fantasy. The tone is a lot different than this book was, so hopefully we'll be seeing that relatively soon.
Great. So I have questions about being a writer. What's your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
I love both parts of writing. I love doing the actual writing and discovering what the stories will be about. Um, I usually start off with just an idea with a phrase, and I'll sit down and I learn what the story's about in more or less real time. And I love doing readings. I love going out and talking to people. Um, I love doing signings and trying to explain in 10 seconds what this book is doing. I'm not crazy, the publishing is hard, especially because it has such a big time lag between when you write something, when it goes out, when it gets published. Um, that can be very frustrating. And it's also difficult to know uh, when things can be republished.
Ah,
Yeah, sometimes I'll get something like, oh, can I print this story? Can we put this in this book? I'm like, well, the first person I gave it to hasn't published it yet, so we have to find out when that's going to happen.
interesting.
It's
Yeah.
not a problem I ever expected when I started writing.
Hmm. Yeah. That would be an interesting problem. Yeah.
You're trying to manage other people's schedules. And I wasn't expecting that.
Hmm. Okay. Now, it sounds like you're a pantser. In other words,
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
yeah,
In everything.
okay. So you don't outline your stories.
If I No, I don't outline. And my stories, I think, are much more interesting when they're done than when I'm starting them out. You have some idea of what the plot will be, but the story will go where it has to go. Um,
And your characters kind of tell you where the story's going.
yeah, or sometimes they get pushed along too. There are things in the world that are bigger than they are, and they have to deal with that. The characters do surprise me. Everything surprises me.
Hmm. So how do you create your characters?
I think most of the characters come out of the situation.
Ah,
Um, because the stories are fantasy, there is always a thing going on that they don't really understand. And people will deal with that in different ways. People will deal with change in different ways. And Sometimes, if I have a very strong idea of where the story ought to go and I try to force it that way, it will feel false. I'll have to go back and start it over at a different point and take it to where they're going. I think my characters are more interesting um,
And
when
they
they're written and when they're conceived.
so the plot comes first and the characters just come with the plot.
Yeah, and they change the plot.
Ah,
They surprised me. I'm definitely a pantser,
okay. Sounds good. So
but I think all writers are pantsers. Do people come here and tell you that they outline?
sometimes, yeah,
No.
sometimes people outline. Yeah. Not, I think most, I don't know. I'm trying to remember if it's 50-50 or a lot of people do are pantsers, but some people do outline. It's interesting. So what's been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
I have had a lot of strange adventures. Uh, the weirdest one might be the time that I tried to collaborate with Stephen Sondheim, and he he turned me down. Um, but also, being a writer puts you in some pretty strange situations where I have done private readings at people's houses, which I didn't even know was a thing before I started writing.
Hmm, that
And
must be very strange.
you start to see a lot of things differently once you're a writer. A lot of details that you forget come back and you start to see the significance of. Just stuff from my own personal life. Uh, because I'm using little bits and pieces of my own memories, things do change and you start to ask questions that you didn't think to ask before.
Huh.
I suppose that's not quite an adventure.
No, but that's very interesting. So, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
In practical terms, if you ever want to do a big adaptation of something and want to use, I don't know, the music of Stephen Sondheim for it, ask before you do the writing. Um, I worked on this project for a long time and, got turned down. Um, but also be open to things. Listen to people, do unexpected things, go places that you don't expect. Everything takes on a new meaning in a different context. And when you're writing, you're constantly creating this new context and you're constantly creating a new way of seeing your own experiences.
Hmm. Okay.
I'm
And
not
what
quite
kind
sure
of
the answer to your question there.
no, that's I mean it's very um it's a very good thing for authors to think about though. What piece of advice would you want to share with other authors?
I am only two books in. I'm not gonna pose as an expert. But
Hmm.
one thing that I've found is that when I started writing and when I started publishing, I thought there was a track to go on. I thought these are the publishers, this is the way you approach a publisher, this is how writing happens, this is the way the writing world happens. And all of those ideas I had were extremely dated. That world is over. I don't think there's any right way to be a writer now. I don't think there's a right way to get to your readers. I think you have to figure out everything on your own, which is, at first, it was disheartening to me. Like, oh, well, I don't know what to do. But I've realized that the way things are now, where they're a bit chaotic, is better for me. I think it suits the way I write and the kinds of things I write. So
Hmm.
the advice is, I think, all old fashioned, and you got to figure it out on your own.
Hmm. Okay. Are there any clubs, groups, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that may have helped you with your career?
I haven't, until like the past few months, really tried to join clubs or organizations.
Mhm.
I do I do wish I were a more social writer, and I'm trying to become one.
Okay.
So I do go to I've started going to, science fiction conventions and trying to get on panels and that kind of thing, but it seems um, it seems that is that one piece of old-fashioned advice that does stay strong is you got to go out there and reach people. If I do another interview with you in a year or two, maybe I can say something more solid. I'm still working on this part.
Okay. That sounds great. Now I have questions about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
That I am a writer. I don't tell people this when I meet them. I don't know how to bring it up.
Huh.
Um, it's something that seems very separate from my regular life. And yeah, I'm trying to change that, but I kind of like the idea of the writer who is very distant and, you read their stuff and you don't know them. I don't need to know all the writers that I read.
Hmm. All right. Uh, I I assume you have a day job.
I teach ESL.
Ah,
So I used to teach literature and other things, but right now I'm teaching ESL.
okay. And yeah, writing um short stories and and things like that does not pay enough to live on. I would assume.
I think very few writers can actually live on what they write.
Yeah.
Um, and I think for me, actually, that's kind of a relief where I'm not going to be that old-fashioned freelancer who's chasing every story and chasing every idea and publishing a million words a year or something. Like Robert Silverberg or even Robert Graves, just constantly pumping out things. I don't think I'd be able to maintain the quality of what I write if I wrote like that.
Hmm. That's a very good point. Very good
I
point.
mean, they did. Robert Graves is a great writer, very prolific, and Robert Silverberg, just picking Roberts here for some reason, but they could certainly do it, but I don't think I could. I think I write too slowly.
Hmm. Okay. The next question is, what is or are your passions when you're not writing?
I have a lot. One thing I do is I play this old-fashioned Italian card game called Scopa.
Hmm.
A 40 card deck, the old fashioned European deck, not all 52 cards. And I have carried my Scopa deck around for the past 20 years all over the world, wherever I've been. And I've been trying to teach people to play it because it's not a very popular game.
Huh.
Um, but I take up a lot of things like that. You know, I do enjoy playing games and I do enjoy traveling, teaching
Okay.
people Scopa, of course.
Great. Okay. And what does your writing space look like? And what do you need to have around you when you're writing or editing?
My my writing space has to change. So I need relative quiet
Hmm.
to write. Um, but I also need a bit of variety. So I'll go to coffee shops, I'll go to libraries, I'll write in the park, wherever. Um, but it has to be a place where I can sit down and not be interrupted.
Ah, okay.
At least for the first draft of something. Um, I find that if I stop writing something and I go back to it in a couple of days, then the style can change. I
Hmm.
can't always get back into that style.
Yeah, good point. Huh. So, you just said that you like silence, that you prefer silence. Do you ever listen to music while you're writing?
I can't. May I try that again? I can't listen to music that I like because I'll listen to the music. So for the most part, I would just rather have the sounds of the highway or
Okay. And do you need to have any food or drink or anything like that with you?
I have a serious coffee problem. I drink a lot of coffee. I drink so much coffee sometimes that I don't enjoy it and it just kind of makes me sick. But
Um,
I do feel like coffee is somehow connected to what I write. Um,
uh-huh. I guess a lot of writers do drink coffee. Some drink tea, but
I like tea, but it doesn't quite push me through like that.
it doesn't do it for you, right?
But
Um,
I don't eat while I write. I just mainly write because eating's messy and I need to focus.
mm. So writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them through their work. And do you have any? And do they help or hinder you?
I would love to have a furrier circle of friends, but I can't now. It's not the kind of life I'm leading. I can't really take care of an animal where I'm living or just the hours I'm working.
Okay, all right. So now I actually, how important is the New England setting for you?
To me, it's huge. It's the only part of America um, that I've lived in, and it has this huge literary tradition of its own. You know, all of the great American poets, Robert Frost and Robert Lowell and Edith St. Vincent Millay and Sylvia Plath, came from New England. And there's a huge well of horror here too, like Lovecraft and Stephen King. And I feel part of that.
Hmm.
I feel like I'm part of both of those traditions and very contradictory things. I feel very connected to places too. So,
And do you use New England setting in your writing at all?
oh, all the time, yes. My last book was a book of poetry, and I think that's very explicit in the book. And I think it is mainly implicit in Sword, Snakes, and Shipwrecks. But the contemporary stories, at least, are definitely set in New England.
Okay. So I have two more questions for you. One, where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? Because we can get your books. And if you call, if the viewers can call us at 508-796-5613. We can get your bigger books, or you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else can people find your books?
I'm afraid it's mainly Amazon and through the publishers. Uh, both of my books have been carried by independent bookshops, but they come and go, and I don't know who's carrying them at the moment.
Okay. And how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
I think that the two best ways to do it are, one is I have a somewhat neglected blog that I started way back when uh, a lot of writers were keeping blogs. And everything that I do, every reading, every time I publish something, will be posted on the blog. And I also have an Instagram account and a Facebook account. So I can
What
give you the
and
list of those.
yes, please. What are the URLs?
Oh, off the top of my head. Um, the blog is thomas.olivieri@wordpress.com.
Okay.
The Facebook is just my name. And the Instagram account, it's at Lens of a Ne'er-Do-Well with underscores separating.
Well, thank you very much, and Thomas. And we will hopefully be seeing you around the store because you're a local author. And it was very nice speaking with you. You had some really interesting thoughts.
Well, thank you, Selena. I can't wait to see this.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Is count